Let's dive right into this explainer and crack open a 4,000-year-old cold case. Today, we're doing a bit of historical detective work to investigate a seriously wild theory. What if two of the ancient world's most famous legendary figures are actually the exact same person?
The source material we're looking at today presents a totally mind-bending idea. Think about it. What if the biblical Nimrod and the Sumerian Gilgamesh are really just two different cultural memories of a single historical king? We're talking about monumental figures here, guys who stood at the absolute dawn of human civilization, right after the ancient flood. If this holds up, it completely changes how we view ancient history.
So, let's line up our suspects. In one corner, we have Nimrod, this towering, dominant figure from the book of Genesis. And in the other, Gilgamesh, the legendary king stamped into the ancient clay tablets of Sumer. To find out if ancient Jewish tradition and Mesopotamian mythology are pointing to the very same guy, we need to trace their geography, their cities, and of course, their character profiles.
Part 1. The Cradle of Civilization. Let's set the scene of the crime at the very dawn of human history.
When you look at the archaeological record, human civilization emerged in a very specific sequence. It starts with the post-flood settlement and the rise of early Sumerian cities like Uruk. But here's the really crucial part. When later empires came rolling in, like the Akkadians and the Babylonians, they didn't just wipe the slate clean. Actually, they absorbed the Sumerian culture. They took their gods, copied their literature, and literally built their own empires directly on top of older Sumerian foundations.
And that brings us to our very first major clue. The biblical writer places Nimrod's kingdom in a land called Shinar. Well, historically speaking, Shinar is simply the Hebrew name for Sumer. This means the biblical record is placing Nimrod at the exact same geographical threshold of history where archaeologists locate the very first cities of humanity.
Part 2. Parallel kingdoms and cities. It's one thing to share a regional border, but can we track these two figures to the exact same street addresses?
Look at how these kingdoms perfectly mirror each other. Genesis tells us Nimrod ruled Babel, Erech, and Akkad. Fast forward to what we know from archaeology, and the match is uncanny. Babel is Babylon, built right on those older Sumerian ruins. Akkad is Akkad, the capital of Sargon's ancient empire. They are operating in the exact same political landscape.
But here is the ultimate connection. The ancient Sumerian king list specifically places Gilgamesh on the throne of a city called Uruk. Now, Uruk is the exact same city that Genesis calls Erech and attributes directly to Nimrod. We literally have our two suspects ruling the identical city in the identical land at the dawn of time.
Part 3. Giants who defied heaven. Okay, so we've placed them at the exact same scene of the crime. Now, do their actual personalities match up?
Jewish tradition describes Nimrod using the specific Hebrew term gibor. Now, this didn't just mean a strong guy who hit the ancient gym. It placed him in a very specific category of superhuman beings, a tyrant seeking total dominion. In fact, later ancient texts explicitly connect him to the Nephilim, the legendary giants of ancient lore.
Well, let's see how that builds when we look at how the Sumerian tablets describe Gilgamesh. The resemblance is just wild. He wasn't considered a regular king. The texts call him 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. A literal giant possessing strength that wildly exceeded normal humans. The Book of Giants from the Dead Sea Scrolls even explicitly names Gilgamesh as one of these ancient giants.
The source points out an undeniable overlap across these profiles. Both figures are remembered by their respective cultures as giants, massive builders, and ruthless tyrants. They're both celebrated as mighty hunters and architects of massive ancient walls. They are practically handing us the exact same resume.
And it doesn't stop there. Both men share a legacy of ultimate defiance. Nimrod famously orchestrated the Tower of Babel to challenge heaven's authority, right? Meanwhile, Gilgamesh went on an epic quest, violently confronting divine beings to demand immortality. Both men stood at the threshold between humanity and the divine and violently pushed back.
Part 4. Shared language of the divine. To really prove these traditions interacted, we have to look for a linguistic smoking gun.
Look at how the biblical writers were intentionally using Babylon's own spiritual vocabulary to communicate. In the biblical book of Daniel, written in Aramaic, the word watcher is used for holy sentinels. In Babylonian Akkadian, the word is kairu, which refers to divine sentinels stationed on sacred mountains who observe humanity. It's a direct linguistic match.
Now, while the Bible definitely doesn't adopt Babylon's theology, this shared terminology proves that both texts were born from the exact same ancient cultural environment. The world of Nimrod and the world of Gilgamesh share the same divine council imagery. For them, giants, watchers, and superhuman early kings were just a standard, universally understood part of the ancient worldview.
Which leads us to Part 5, One Legend, Two Traditions. Let's zoom out and look at the final verdict of our historical investigation.
How did these mirror image stories actually survive? Well, Sumerian oral stories get pressed into early clay tablets. Then, centuries later, the Akkadians and Babylonians inherit and translate that memory. They didn't invent this giant king, they just kept his legend alive. And in parallel, the biblical writers preserved the Hebrew memory of this exact same era. Two different cultures preserving the memory of a king whose fame had literally shattered the ancient world.
So the crucial point is right here when you lay out the evidence. The parallels are far too precise to be an accident. Shinar is Sumer, Erech is Uruk. A Gibor perfectly matches a two-thirds divine giant. To find God at Babel mirrors Gilgamesh confronting the gods. It all aligns beautifully.
Whether they were literally the exact same man or simply culturally distinct reflections of a single unforgettable tyrant, both traditions perfectly converge on one colossal figure. Early Christian thinkers, ancient Jewish writers, and modern scholars all notice this massive overlap. They aren't just telling similar stories, they are remembering the exact same ancient world.
If Nimrod and Gilgamesh are truly the same ancient king, it leaves us with a thrilling question to end our explainer on today. If this wild legend is actually grounded in true historical fact, who else is hiding in ancient history? What other ancient myths are just waiting for their cold cases to be reopened? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you next time.